There's nothing better than two guests, but we'll do our best with one, the great Michael Lombardi. You know Michael hangs out with me every single week. And Michael, I've been wildly excited to talk to you about the Ravens, specifically Mike Macdonald, the head coaching hire. How concerned would you be hiring a coach that's 36 years old?
Well, I think, it's what situation does he walk into? He's got a really good general manager, John Schneider, who's been around Pete Carroll for 14 years. He worked for Marty Schottenheimer back in Washington as the general manager. So he brings a lot of experience to the job, which will certainly help Mike Macdonald. I think that's really important. I think the imbalance, you don't want young and young. You kind of want young, and then it depends also how willing Mike Macdonald is to listen, right? I think that's part of the job of being a head coach, is getting information that you can rely on and then acting upon it. To me, what makes the hire, what I appreciate, is the fact of what he was able to do in Baltimore. I think Baltimore's defensive team is interesting in the sense that it's not filtered with these elite players. Yes, Kyle Hamilton's very good. There was Marlon Humphreys, a good inside nickel corner. Roquan Smith is very good at linebacker. But there's a lot of guys, too, specifically, Clowney and Kyle Van Noy, that they picked up off the street that made significant contributions. And if you're John Schneider, you're saying, hey, if he could do that with that team, I've got better corners than he had. I've got better defensive personnel overall than perhaps Baltimore had. Maybe not the elite level, but I think I can make this go. And getting a young coach who's proven he can game plan and develop talent is what the game's all about today.
So stick with Schneider for a second, because from a young coach's standpoint, how much of an advantage is it? It's something we talked a little bit about with Charles Robinson yesterday on Inside Coverage. I feel like for a coach coming into it, is there an advantage coming into a structure that's more built here where, presumably more things are being handled in the right way from the day you walk in the door?
Well, I think they're looking for a little bit of a change. I think if they wanted the same, they probably would have hired Dan Quinn, right? Because Dan Quinn was there. He knows Pete Carroll's system. Dan Quinn got hired after Macdonald by the Washington football team. So to me, this is about, we want a little bit of a change. Maybe bring some of that Baltimore, Michigan program with you to Seattle. Look, here's the facts. They have not been a very good home field team. This is a place that should be hard to play. They haven't been able to get control of the game with their defense. Pittsburgh goes in there and runs the ball effectively, throws it, wins a game in December against them that really ultimately cost them an opportunity at the playoffs. So I think this is about, we're going to shift our culture, we're going to shift our behavior pattern, and we're going to try to go with something different in terms of where this is all going to lead us as we move forward. And I think ultimately that's what they need to do. And Macdonald will give them a different spin with the culture that's in place and change it.
So you mentioned Dan Quinn, but before we get to Quinn with the Washington Commanders, let's get to the guy who said no to the job, at least according to all reports. Were you surprised that Ben Johnson elected to go back to Detroit rather than take a head coaching gig?
I was not convinced he was the number one choice. I think Ben Johnson is a guy that if you talk to people last year and that interviewed Ben Johnson, they thought he was quiet, reserved, perhaps a year away. I'm not sure that Washington felt that he was the clear-cut winner. I think he was in a pool of other candidates. Remember, they interviewed Quinn, and then they were going to fly to Detroit to interview Johnson again. I think if they thought Johnson was the guy, they would have been in Detroit waiting for him to get done. So I think a lot of that is the narrative that's going on. We know that Johnson is a good coach. He's a very good play caller. He's a very good tactician. Now, he also has got a team that's going to come back. So next year will be a better opportunity perhaps for him where he can interview for a head coaching job that he feels comfortable. Washington has a lot of cooks in the kitchen. I'm not sure as a young coach you want to go to an organization with a lot of cooks in the kitchen.
So who is Dan Quinn in your mind for the Commanders?
I think with this Dan Quinn hire is Washington's trying to borrow the model of what Detroit did. This is collaborative. Now, you say Detroit's one, it's a collaborative effort. Brad Holmes, Dan Campbell, they collaborated together and worked and filled it to thing. Successful, great. I'm not sure that's always going to work. The two teams in the Super Bowl have a collaboration, but the head coach runs the organization. Nothing happens in San Francisco without Kyle signing off on it. Just read his contract. Nothing happens in Kansas City without Andy Reid signing on off it. Just read his contract. So to me, collaboration is good if everybody's good at their jobs. We'll see in Washington. I think, to me, it's an interesting combination of Adam Peters and Dan Quinn coming together. Dan, you had an opportunity to talk to Mike Vrabel. You didn't do that. You had an opportunity to talk to Bill Belichick. You didn't do that. You picked a coach who took a team to the Super Bowl and lost, and you replaced him because you replaced a coach who took a team to the Super Bowl and lost with a coach who took a team to the Super Bowl and lost. So we're going to see how this goes, and hopefully it goes in the right direction. But I think as a Washington fan, you had a chance to get Vrabel, you had a chance to get Belichick, and you chose to go this collaborative way. I don't know if that works.
The collaboration is such an interesting point. The way you phrase it is so interesting because you're right. Like, I think at some point we have to acknowledge the two teams in the Super Bowl don't necessarily have collaboration, but the guys are hitting on all cylinders. Like, it's working the right way. So if you're Vrabel and you're Belichick, you may not have been as interested in collaboration. So it's interesting, like, where do you weigh the candidate you're talking to versus the way you think you want business to be run? Like, the Titans made it very clear they want this big collaboration. Do any of us really know if that's going to work better than it did with Vrabel? We have no idea, right?
Well, same thing in Atlanta, and I know Charles wrote a column about the not hiring Belichick, and he made the points that they felt like this organization, from a front office standpoint, was suited to continue to grow. I respect that opinion, but to me, they've won 21 games in the last 3 years with Terry Fontenot as the general manager, right? And if Terry Fontenot really wanted to win and he was wanting to be somebody that could advance his level of intellect, then he probably would have hired Belichick. But if he wants to keep his power base and not feel threatened, then he's going to hire someone like Raheem Morris, who's not going to change. Look, this is all about self-preservation. There's an old saying we had in the league going back to George Young when he was at the New York Football Giants: guard your desk. There's a lot of guarding your desk in the NFL. People are scared and intimidated by what the change is. And if you're an owner like Clark Hunt, who basically had Scott Pioli sitting in his office, and he went out and hired Andy Reid, and Andy Reid fired everybody in the building and started with his organization, that works. If you have owners like Josh Harris and you have owners like Arthur Blank, who really didn't want to disrupt his organization, those guys probably aren't the best hires for you.
It's interesting. So do you think Vrabel and Belichick are back in the league? Vrabel, obviously younger, seems like it's hard to think he's never going to coach again. Where do you think Bill ends up back in the league?
Oh, I think there'll be an owner or two that want to win bad enough that they'll call. I think, to me, this is we're going to see this collaboration, how it's all going to work out, right? We're going to see how it's all going to manifest itself. And if you study the NFL as much as I have, and if you study teams as much as I have, I kind of know where this is going to go. And I think ultimately both will be back in the league next year.
Yeah, it is interesting to me, especially the Vrabel portion of it, because it felt like the world looked so much at Tennessee up and down and said, hey, Vrabel's not the problem. And now you've got a bunch of coaches, and it may work out, Michael. Like, I want to say this. It may work out.
Work out.
But, like, there's so little proof of concept to the guys that have been hired this year. I think it's fair to say, I don't know. Like, is Brian Callahan going to be a good head coach? Who the hell knows? Like, I just think that's the real analysis for so much of this is, like, you're trying something and it may work and it may not work, but you knew what you had with Vrabel at some point. The whole league knew what they had with Belichick and with Vrabel, and they chose to go in a different direction. We won't know for a few years, but it feels like that's the sort of thing that will bite somebody in the ass somewhere.
Well, I think it's all about guarding your desk, right? You can't tell me that the team of Raheem Morris and Terry Fontenot is better than building Belichick and letting him win. That's 6 Super Bowls. But look, let's be clear here. The guys doing the hiring, could they really interview Vrabel? Could they really interview Belichick? Those two happen to know more football than the people doing the interview. And when that happens, usually the people don't get the job.
It's guard your desk is going to be, I'm going to steal that from you, and I'm going to use that in my analysis moving forward all the time, because one of the most interesting things to me in any organization, you've talked so much and really taught me over the course of this year how important structure is. But I think what I'm learning as we continue to talk is that it's structure without ego is much more difficult, right? Like, so A, you got to identify exactly what the structure of your organization is going to be. B, from an ownership standpoint, you got to be selfless in that structure when it comes together and ask yourself, what's best for my business to actually win? Not what do I want, what makes me feel good, but what's best for my business to actually win. That takes structure without ego. I don't know how many people can accomplish that.
No, I don't think they can. And nobody, they say in Atlanta, Rich McKay is no longer involved. Well, obviously the coach that they hired, Raheem Morris, was Rich McKay's number one choice. So don't tell me that this hire wasn't beneficiary to other people within the building. And I think what you really have to take a hard look at is the person itself, right? I mean, are you willing to work and compete within the arena? And a lot of people aren't. They would rather just guard their desk and not move forward. And then they try to sell their fan base on, we are really trying to win titles. We are committed to excellence. If you really are, Mike Vrabel probably would have been your coach if you really are, because he's got a proven track record. I'm rolling the dice with Callahan. I'm rolling the dice with Morris. I'm rolling the dice with Quinn. Vrabel has won, and we saw it with a team that wasn't overly talented. So for me, I think that's the conversation. But look, it doesn't surprise me, Fitz. In 1975, interviewing with Paul Zimmerman, Bill Walsh described this situation perfectly. He said, whoever sits with the owner on game day and the personnel director and the president, they sit together, they convince the owner that everything that's wrong with their organization has to do with the coaching and the development of the talent. And what happens is the owner listens to him because he really doesn't know. And then by listening to him, he'll make changes with the staff repeatedly. And then eventually these people in power keep their jobs. That's the cycle that Walsh talked about in 75. It's here today.
Somehow, some way, we will together break the cycle of suck. That's what I'm going to call it from now on. Michael, always doing great work. You can check out the Lombardi Line that airs on VSiN weekdays, 1 p.m. Eastern, weekends, 10 a.m. Eastern, as well as his weekly GM Shuffle podcast. Check out all of Michael's NFL takes at VSiN, VSIN.com. Michael, my friend, thanks for hanging with me.
Thank you, Fitz.